We're moving straight into the discussion segments where we have our guest standing by. Now, today, before we get to our guest, today we're still talking about flooding, which has been a conversation through the interactive segment, and doubling back on it in the discussion segments where we'll be having a guest to critically, analyze that for us. Now, like we said, with predictions of more rain to come, and that's the federal government raising alarm on that, and the situation of Cameroon decision to open the Lagdo Dam, which threatens to increase the flood, although they are doing it gradually. All these are putting questions in the minds of Nigerians and even the government, with Nigerians questioning the government, asking, are we prepared to mitigate the impact? What measures can be taken to prevent or minimize future flooding? And how can communities protect themselves? So in the next 25 to 30 minutes, we'll delve into these questions. We have our Zoom guest who will join us in the course of the conversation from Bamaiyi University, Kano. Dr. Murtala Mohammed. He will join us then. And then we also have from Numan in Adamawa State, we have Dr. Agoso Bamaiyi, who is a social entrepreneur and a developmental strategist. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Agoso.
Thank you for having me.
All right, Dr. Agoso. Now, what's your take as a developmental strategist? What's your take on this whole flooding situation in Nigeria at the moment? Keeping in mind the current situation happening in Borno and the notification from Lagdo Dam saying that they will start releasing their waters slowly, and also remembering what happened when they released their water, the last time. What's your take on all of this?
Well, anytime Lagdo in Cameroon say they will release water, I get bothered, myself and many people out here, because we sit right on the banks of River Benue. Actually, my hometown where I live and work, Numan, is the confluence of River Gongola and also River Benue. So Gongola and Benue meet here in Numan, and then move on downstream across the country into Taraba, Benue, and then Kogi, before going into the delta on the way to the ocean. So it's already people are jittery, and people are trying to do what they can do, because this is a recurring decimal for a very long time. Let me give a background, and it's actually part of the problems we have here in Nigeria. Our developmental strategy, if I'm allowed to use that phrase, has failed us. Because you see, of course, there's the aspect of climate change, and as a result, the weather has changed, and the weather pattern has become unpredictable. When it's heat, you tend to have a lot of heat, a lot more than it used to be. When it's floods, you tend to have a lot more flooding than it used to be, and all that. That aspect is there. I'm not denying it. But I grew up here in Numan. I have seen River Benue in its normal, natural form before they started building Lagdo Dam in 1977 and 1976, and the Kiri Dam on Gongola. Lagdo Dam is built on the source of the Benue, and Kiri Dam is built on the source of the Gongola. Now, Kiri Dam was built. They started building in 77 and commissioned it 82. The same year when Kiri Dam was commissioned, the same dam, Lagdo Dam, was commissioned. They built Kiri Dam for, it's the federal government, the Nigerian federal government, to supply irrigation water for Savannah Sugar Company. At that time, on installed capacity, Savannah Sugar Company was the biggest sugar company in the whole of Africa. It's now Dangote Sugar Refinery. Dangote bought it over during the last privatization that was done. Now, so the reason for building it was to supply irrigation water to the cane plantation of Savannah Sugar, which is now Dangote Sugar Refinery. In Cameroon, the dam in Cameroon was built actually for electricity generation, and that means for economic reasons. But the actual reason behind it, which the public does not know, and I need to talk about this, is that China was having problems with its dam, with its rivers, I think it's the 7 gorgeous rivers. And they were thinking about building a dam to control the floods in China. And as China is, they usually do not bring in expatriates to do anything for them. They like to do everything by themselves. They have the head knowledge, as it were, of how to build dams, but not the practical experience. So China approached Cameroon and offered to build the Lagdo Dam for Cameroon for free, for economic purposes and all that. But in the actual sense, China was looking for a place to practice so they can have the experience and then go back to China and build the dam. Eventually, they built Lagdo Dam. It was commissioned in '82, and they went back to China and built the biggest dam in the world. The biggest dam is the Seven Gorges Dam in the world. It was built by experience they gained in building Lagdo Dam. But Lagdo Dam left us with a lot of problems that we're facing now.
Okay.
And it's the fault of the Nigerian government. Because before the Lagdo Dam was built, there was an environmental impact assessment study that was done. This is a requirement. Since River Benue is shared between Nigeria and Cameroon, mainly rises in Cameroon, but it also affects parts of Chad, but mainly Nigeria. They didn't just build it like that. They were required by law to contact Nigeria. They contacted Nigeria. And the environmental impact study that was done recommended that Nigeria should build a buffer dam, a dam that will receive excess water from Lagdo and then re-release the water. I use that word deliberately. Re-release the same water into the Benue Trough at the natural volume and the natural strength of the Benue, so that everything downstream in Nigeria will continue normal. The recommendation was to build it in Dasin Hausa. Dasin Hausa is a community in Adamawa State. The Benue comes into Nigeria first in Adamawa State before moving on to other states. And this dam was to be built around 83, 84. It would have costed Nigeria like 70 million. Around 70 million naira if we had built it then.
Back then, okay.
And we could use it to generate electricity. We could also use it for irrigation, farming, and other purposes. So it had an added economic advantage if we had built it. But it will mainly control the water, so that it will receive water from Lagdo Dam and re-release the same water back into the Benue Trough at the natural strength and the natural volume of the river. That was not done.
Okay.
Today, if we were to build that in Hausa Dam,
it would cost us a lot more.
Billions, multiple billions to build it.
All right, Dr. Agoso. Thank you for giving us this backdrop. I think it has opened our eyes to a lot that is happening, and giving us a backstory to what has put us where we are today. But before we continue our conversation, we have our second guest who is also joining us via Zoom. He's Dr. Murtala Mohammed. He's an environmentalist and a climate change expert, and also a lecturer at the Daybreak University, Kano. Thank you very much for joining us, Dr. Murtala Mohammed.
In our listeners.
Hello, doctor. Can you hear me? All right. While we're waiting for him to respond, let's get back to you, Dr. Agoso. Now, seeing what has happened, with all the backdrop you've given to us, and the fact that the other dam that's meant to be in Nigeria has not been done just yet, at this point, what would you say we're waiting for? Because we keep on receiving the same information year in, year out. Beyond the Lagdo Dam, even with the frequent rainfall that has been happening, we're seeing normal rainfall causing flooding already. Talk more of the dam that is being released, and then the case of Alao Dam in Maiduguri. What's your thoughts on all of this, and what's your thoughts on the government taking predictions for preparedness?
Well, predictions are good, but we should go beyond predictions, because the floodings we have generally all across Nigeria, including the one in Maiduguri right now, is actually man-made. In Maiduguri, we're having a dam that has over. It's embankments, and a dam is a man-made thing, not natural. If we had left these rivers in their natural form, we would not be talking what we're talking today. And when we come to build dams for economic purposes, we don't manage them. At the end of the day, we don't get the economic benefits. And Lagdo Dam has not given Cameroon the economic benefit that Cameroon expected from it. And Lagdo is about 40 years old now. The same thing with Kiri Dam that I mentioned. It hasn't given the benefit that government said it was going to give, the economic benefit, but rather it's caused all kinds of problems. So because mitigation works were not done, the Bofa Dam was not built. What happened was that the Benue was not flowing at its natural strength. It actually ebbed because they had to close the sluices for water coming in to fill the space of the dam. It took 2 years. And by the third year, they started releasing water. But what happened was that the tributaries of River Benue kept on flowing in. These are seasonal rivers. They bring in a lot of sand. And because Benue was not flowing at its natural strength, it could not cleanse itself. So the sand built and built and built and built until what we have now is that the Benue is completely filled up with sand through the process of siltation. And so when you release the normal water that naturally Benue would have would hold easily without any difficulty pre-Lagdo Dam, it becomes a problem now because the depth is no longer there. And so you have water spilling into communities that have been there for hundreds of years. These communities were not just built now. They've lived with the Benue peacefully for a very long time. So we failed to do what we're supposed to do. Benue filled up with sand. And let me emphasize this. When I was growing up, we used to go to the Benue and swim. And you could run from the land and then jump and turn in the air, acrobatics like 3-4 times before you meet the water. The water was from the water up to the land on the bank was like 4-5 meters deep. Right now, you walk from your house, walk to the bank of the river, and walk to the river bed straight. There's no longer depth. It's completely gone. In fact, the river bed has been turned into farms. People farm there now. Previously, those were river beds. So the depth is completely gone. Unfortunately, the water has not reduced, but it has rather increased. And when the Lagdo Dam is coming under challenge, because there's so much water it can hold, and they would rather release the water in a controlled way than to have the dam break. And I'll talk about the breakage of the dam, if the possibility of that, if we have the time.
Yeah, we'll get to all of that.
When the water,
we'll get to all of that shortly. Yeah, sorry for interrupting. We'll get to all of that shortly. But let's quickly acknowledge the presence of our Zoom guest who is back and take a few questions, get his opinion on what we're talking about. Thank you, Dr. Murtala Mohammed, for joining us.
You are welcome. And good morning, our listeners.
Good morning. So we're talking about the case of, the current flood, current response and efforts, effective prevention and mitigation strategies, and then community preparedness and early warning signs. So let me get your opinion as an environmentalist and a climate change expert now. Aside the fact that we're seeing dams like Lagdo and Alao and all of that, what's your take on, what does the impact of water from dams, such as the Alao Dam that just happened and the Lagdo Dam, how does this affect our ecosystem and our environment? How can it be mitigated? Is there a way we can do something within our environment or the climate somehow to mitigate this some way, somehow?
You see, actually, when you look at the essence of building dams is to control flood and then to keep water for use throughout the year. These are the major purposes in addition to others like supplying electricity and the like. But there is generally a problem with respect to how we manage our water. You build dam, but still you need to provide a means to release water in case there is problem. And equally, you need to control the amount of water that will reach your dam. But our problem is issues of management. We are not managing our water system very well. You see that the water channels have been largely been filled up with sands, and this is reducing the capacity of the channels through which we release the you have a lot of development around the drainages and waterways. Of that, in any case, whenever there is flood, the people will suffer, and that is what is happening all over the country. You could see that our major issue is urban flood, because our urban areas are not designed with the what we are witnessing of winter seasons now. When you look at our climate, you see that most of the recent years, particularly of the north, have been very wet. And because of that, the rainfall has reached beyond the capacity of our dams and reservoirs. And that is why you have this problem of dams being getting filled up, and then the flood. And unless we become conscious of our environment, we manage our waterways effectively, we are bound to have this kind of problem whenever we have lots of water receiving lots of rain coming in. Yeah.
All right. All right, thank you there, Dr. Murtala, for that. He has said that we have to learn how to manage our environment better, otherwise this is going to keep repeating itself. But let's get back to you now, Dr. Agoso. Enough of the blame game, enough of the causes. What key developmental policy shifts do you believe are necessary to improve Nigerians' flood resilience? What are those key developmental policy you think the Nigerian government can and might be willing to put in place that would, help improve Nigeria's flood resilience, especially in vulnerable regions?
Well, using the Benue River trough as an example, I would suggest strongly that the government should go ahead. It's a lot expensive now to build that's in Hausa buffer dam.
Okay.
It's going to help a lot in mitigating the challenges that we have here annually. And then, of course, the Benue River has been the siltation has filled it up with sand. It's completely filled up with sand, such that small water, you have floodings all across the Benue length. Now, what needs to be done, like it's done in other parts of the world, is dredging. We have dredged parts of River Niger, the parts that are within Nigeria, but River Benue has not been dredged. And let me say this in case there are policy makers listening to me, that River Benue brings in a lot more water into Nigeria than River Niger. River Niger is longer, it's bigger, it's the first river in Nigeria. Benue is the second river, but it actually brings in a lot more water. So we need to put emphasis on dredging. And then, of course, in the future, if we are building a dam and environmental impact studies are done, we should follow the recommendations religiously. We should not save money now and just be good because we don't want to spend money now, and then have to spend much more money in the future. And of course, not to mention the wahala that our people pass through, the deaths, the dislocations, and all that.
All right, thank you, Dr. Agoso. Now let's get back to you, Dr. Murtala. We're looking at the South this time. You're an environmentalist and a climate change expert. We already know that in southern Nigeria, when it comes to rainfall and water, we're seeing places like rivers, Cross River, among the list of states that might be affected if with the Lagdo Dam being released. But although they said they're releasing it gradually, it still doesn't take out the fact that there might be a certain level of flooding. So at this point, what can be done for those states that naturally, I know I grew up in Cross River State, and sometimes when it's really heavy with the rains and you're driving towards the Itu Bridge area, you would see that the roads are even flooded. Sometimes people can't pass that area because the roads are even flooded. So at this point, as an environmentalist, what can be done to, can anything be done to mitigate it or reduce it to the barest minimum for the southern states that didn't experience it as much as the north this time around?
I think at this stage, the best thing to do is to sensitize people. Let us identify the proper places that are likely to be affected, and people should be evacuated. Already we are far into the mess now, and we cannot do much now to stop the flood because the rain is coming and you cannot stop it. You can do is let people be sensitized, be well informed, and evacuation mechanisms be developed so that when the water come, the level of damage that can be that are likely to come will be reduced. People should leave the waterways now. They should be evacuated and they should be communicated in a way they could understand. You know, in the case of Maiduguri, people were warned, but they don't have alternative most of the time, and not much has been done to move them out of those places that are likely to be affected. For now, what we can do is just to ensure that people were moved out of the areas that lie that at high risks of being affected, the floodplain and the areas that are liable to this flood. Otherwise, we cannot do much at now.
All right. How about you, Dr. Agoso? What's your thought on what he has said now? We've spoken a lot about the north and the River Benue, coming, and then the building of the buffer dam there. Let's look at the south and the south, like places like Anambra, rivers that have been put in Cross River. These are already riverine areas, and would the impact be as much as it would be there as it would be in the northern part of the country? And what strategies, developmental strategies, do you think could be put in place that would make a difference?
Take care of the factors that result in flooding on the Benue and the Niger. It will also alleviate the pains that they have in the south and the east, because when the Benue meets the Niger at Lokoja, at the confluence at Lokoja, it actually flowed. That's where you have the waters now going into the delta and passing through states in the east and some states in the south. So alleviating the problems upstream will alleviate the problems downstream. So it has to be holistic. Okay? There has to be measures to attend to moving people away from flood prone areas like the doctor suggested there and all that. But generally we have to deepen our rivers. The rivers have become shallow, and no matter what we do on the surface, we will still always have to contend with serious problems, except we take time to deepen these rivers by dredging. It's very, very important we do that. Yeah. Another thing we suggested to the government, and this suggestion was done, I was part of a committee of concerned citizens. We were not formed by the government. We talked to ourselves and we came together and we brainstormed on how we could overcome these challenges. You remember during the tail end of Buhari's administration, there was this serious flooding that year. And the government set up a committee. So we worked on a recommendation and submitted it to the committee. And one of the things we did was that actually the floodings can be a blessing in disguise. We could create channels where we control this water from the river trough inland, like in Gongola, in Adamawa, for instance. And it would supply water for animal herds during dry season inland. Have channels, have artificial lakes where these things are kept. And I know that people will say, why are we talking about these things? These things are not natural. We have an unnatural problem here. We have to find unnatural solutions to it. So every method, every suggestion should be on the table. And the government should be willing to look at those that are most likely to work and apply itself to it. Let's stop saying that there is no money to attend to this, there is no money to attend to it. The truth of the matter is that this will not get better. As the years go by, it is only going to get worse. And we should remember that Lagdo Dam is 40 years. As a 40-year-old gentleman, you know that your body begins to tell you that you are aging. That dam is aged. And given the culture of maintenance in Africa, there is no telling when it may give way. And if it breaks, I am afraid it will create such a huge catastrophe that it will be referred to as biblical proportions. And we don't look for that, but we should think about it, because Lado Dam is old. And we should not sit back and be saying there won't be any problem, there won't be any problem. We should begin to think about contingency plans and what we can do to make sure that we prevent these annual floodings, and it keeps getting worse, and it will get worse.
All right.
As long as we do not do anything about it.
All right, Doctor, before I get to you, Dr. Murtala, I have this question for Dr. Agoso quickly. You made mention sometime in our conversation before Dr. Murtala joined us, you spoke about, the Chinese coming to learn dam building in Cameroon, Lagdo Dam, and going to build one of the largest dams in the world there in China. Now, Nigeria is known for learning and picking up lessons from the Western world, even down to our social media culture and attitudes and things that shouldn't be. So at this point, scanning through your experience as a developmental strategist, what part of the country do you think, or what part of the world do you think Nigerians can pick up lessons from? What part of developing countries do you think Nigerians can pick up lessons from, especially when it comes to ways to mitigate flooding, with how our terrain is here in Nigeria and with how much we've experienced flooding? What lessons can we pick up from developing countries that could help at this point in time, or probably given in the next 5-6 years span?
I think we should look to China rather than the Western world. I know there are dams in the West, and right now they are also having floodings. But if you notice the way the floodings are happening in Europe, it's in a much more controlled fashion. It's not as strong, it's heavy, but not as destructive as we have here. But China has the largest dam in the world, and it's producing electricity, and they're using it effectively. There's an attitude with which the Chinese approach life that we should learn from. It's not everything about China that I agree with, but one of the things we should learn from China is their attitude towards the ability to perform rather than certificates. In Nigeria, we emphasize certification. So you have engineers that are highly certificated but cannot do practical engineering work. In China, they emphasize what we refer to as Sabi ticket. Your ability to perform is much more important to them than your academic qualifications. Of course, they respect academic qualifications, but they emphasize practical ability to perform. They are ready to learn. They can take something from you and do it better than you. Like they learn how to do pounded yam here. They are producing poundo and bringing it back to Nigeria, producing gari and bringing it back to Nigeria, and we're buying. So we should learn that attitude of seeing how we can learn and make the best of our situation and take care of our own problems rather than depending on others from outside to come and solve them for us.
All right. Thank you very much, Doctor, for throwing light on that. Now let's get back to you, Dr. Murtala. As a climate change expert, let's look at our agricultural sector, because when these floodings happen, we see hectares of farmlands being destroyed. Farmers are left without source of livelihood. So as a climate change expert now, what ways can Nigeria's agricultural sector, adapt a changing climate patterns, including flooding, that would not compromise food production? Is it possible for farmers to find a way to adapt to the changing climate, the constant climate change we're experiencing, like constant rainfall that is happening and flooding as a result of constant rainfall, and even as a result of, man-made cases? So what ways do you think the agricultural sector and farmers can adapt?
See, when you look at climate change, in itself, it is not always a problem. The issue is how to cope with the situation. Some of the issues related to climate. For instance, our climate is becoming wetter more than what we had in the past. So we should be able to now produce seeds that can be in tune with the current situation. We build a lot of dams in Nigeria, but we are not utilizing most of those dams. You can imagine a state like Kano has over 23 as dams, but the level of irrigation is very, very low. And that's bound to create a lot of problems, because we build dams in order to keep water for agriculture and for other uses. But we allow it only to be a problem to us, because once you have excess rain, those dams become a threat rather than a means of controlling water. And it's the same when you look at the situation all over the country. In Katsina, the dam was built for nearly 40 years, but the irrigation project is yet to take place. And with that, we had a lot of problems. So to cut it short, when you have climate change, you should be able now to look at your agricultural production system, try to cultivate crops that may be drought resistance if you have a drought problem. And try to use even the flooded areas after the flooding, one of the areas which can be utilized for other agricultural production. So flood is not always a problem as to anticipate. It is only a problem when it is excessive and it destroys lives. But some people like the fisheries are happy with certain floods when it is not excessive. So we should take advantage of every turn it into a blessing by utilizing the what it brought and use it to our advantage. And I think that is why what Dr. did with regards to China and particularly the other Asian countries, we can learn a lot of lessons from them, China, India, and the like, because they have most of them. They have a lot of most part of them are tropics, just like Nigeria, and the technology of utilizing the environment is almost within our reach. Unlike the European countries, their level of development is a bit higher and very costly unaffordable for developing countries like Nigeria. So we can learn a lot from China, India, and their neighbors.
All right, quickly now, can you throw more light? You've mentioned this. Now let's look at long-term environmental strategies that Nigerians can adopt to restore, natural floodplains and wetlands. We have places where we know, okay, these are floodplains, these are flood terrains, these are waterways. So what long-term environmental strategies can be put in place to restore these places and such a way that, like you said, can be used to our advantages?
Now, to do that, we need to, first of all, make a comprehensive study of our river systems and try to define our flood-prone areas, what you call floodplain. Let them be well-defined and be well planned, managed, and sustained. And with regards to, it's not always a solution to the problem. So we should be able to know what is best for each and every part of our environment. And deepening our river channels is quite a solution that we should try to embrace, because our river system were filled up with a lot of sand through siltation. So we need to deepen them, and then planting of trees along the waterways should also be part of our strategy. We should now, reforestation should be part of our problem in order to increase the soil absorption, water absorption by the soil. Filtration. Because when you have trees being cut off and you are exposing the soil, one which will now be washed away and fill your waterways. And equally, you are reducing the level of infiltration.
Thank you very much. Now, let's quickly take one quick question from Dr. Agoso. Very quickly, Dr. Agoso, looking at urban and rural development strategies now and Nigeria's rapid increasing population, finally, before we go quickly, what strategies can be put in place, to prevent unregulated expansions into flood-prone areas? Very quickly, we're out of time, but let's just quickly put this out there before we go.
When Fashola became the governor of Lagos State, I was in Lagos. And Lagos was prone to flooding. The man did something in Lagos that I think other governors should learn from. He was strong enough to remove all buildings, whoever owned the building, that were on waterways. And secondly, he built large gutters and canals that ran across the length and breadth of Lagos, most of which are covered, and they handled water very well. That's
yeah, but Lagos is still experiencing flooding.
Yeah, they are, but it would have been a lot worse if not for the works that were done by Fashola. Governors should be strong enough to say, you are sitting on a waterway, please move away, allow the water naturally to flow, and then do whatever mitigation measures through channelization and the rest of it to make sure that our cities continue to exist without this constant flooding.
All right. Thank you very much, Dr. Agoso Bamaiyi, for joining us. It's been a very educative and interactive section. Thank you for joining us on the show.
Thank you. Thank you.
And Dr. Murtala, thank you so much for also joining us and sharing your insights with us. It's been great having you on the show as well. Thank you for joining us. All right. Those were our guests in the discussion segment, Dr. Agoso Bamaiyi, who is a developmental strategist, a developmental consultant, and we also have Dr. Murtala Mohammed, who is an environmentalist and a climate change expert. Now, with the combination of those two voices, we've been able to understand flooding, understand the causes, given a backstory to dams and water releases from dams, how it affects our ecosystem, how it affects Nigeria, and possible solutions. I hope you've been able to take something away from our conversation today. But we're going on a quick break. When we get back, we'll look at the front story, or the front page rather, of our newspapers, and we'll look at the stories that made it there, and we'll also have a conversation on that. Do stay tuned. We'll be right back.